Today in our 2017 Ford F53 Chassis Motorhome, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the SumoSprings Maxim custom helper springs for the rear axle. Having a motorhome can be a great thing. We can take trips with our family and see a lot of places that we could never see before. But one thing that a lot of people don't talk about and don't think about is the suspension and how their motorhome is going to drive. Here at etrailer.com, we see a lot of that issues of customers coming in complaining that their motorhome feels like it's rolling, it's got a lot of body roll, and just not all that stable going down the road. And we can see in our motorhome there's quite a bit of space for wind to catch the side. We're basically driving a giant windscreen going down the highway. So we're fighting that wind, pushing the steering wheel back and forth, which eventually can get very tiring and not very much fun once we get to our location. So we're going to take our motorhome out on our test course and see how it handles before we put our suspension upgrades on. As I'm driving through our bump course here, I can definitely feel each time I hit a bump, whether it's a solid bump and the front end's coming up and coming back down and bouncing really hard, or if it's the alternating bumps to where we're getting a lot of body roll back and forth. It really just doesn't feel very solid or planted on the ground. Now as I come up to the slalom course and I'm going in and out of turns, I can really feel the body roll. Every time I make a turn, it almost feels like my motorhome wants to lean before it actually starts reacting. And with the wind today, I'm definitely fighting the steering wheel, trying to get it back to center. So here's what our Sumo Springs are going to look like once we have them installed. These are going to greatly reduce the amount of driver fatigue we have and give us a nice, smooth, comfortable ride when we're driving down the road. And our rear springs are going to do that by supporting the weight of our motorhome in between the leaf spring and the frame here. Now each one of our springs are going to be made out of a microcellular urethane, so they're going to resist most automotive chemicals like oil, road salts, and UV rays, so we know they're going to last a long time. And on the back of our motorhome, typically a lot of them are going to have a bathroom or a bedroom towards the back. That can add a lot of weight to the rear axle. And since we're asking our rear axle and suspension to support not only the motorhome but all that extra weight, it's going to put a lot of strain and stress. Our Sumo Springs are going to take some of the strain and stress off of our factory suspension because it's going to help support that load. And it is going to help absorb road shock, so we'll have a nice smooth ride. And our Sumo Springs are going to provide a progressive load control, so the more we load them down, the stiffer they're going to become. And the lighter the load, the springs are going to compress easily for a soft engagement and a less bumpy ride. And whenever the springs do compress, they can compress up to 80%. But the way they're designed is they're going to compress vertically and they're not going to expand out to the side, so we're not going to have to worry about any other components. Because once we have our tire back in place, it will be pretty close, but we're not going to have to worry about it coming in contact. And whenever we're not loaded down, our springs are going to be able to extend up to 50% of their normal height. So we don't have to worry about any kind of limitations when it comes to our suspension travel. We'll have plenty of compression and rebound. And since we're going to have one spring on each side, they are going to work independently from each other. So if we take a turn and this one compresses down, the other one is going to extend up so it can handle that extra load. Or if we have an uneven load that's in our motorhome. Our helper springs are going to have a weight capacity of 3,000 pounds. Now keep in mind, they're not meant to increase the payload of your motorhome, they're just there to help support that extra weight. They are going to come with everything you need to get it installed, and we are just going to have to drill a few holes to bolt everything up. One of my favorite things about these springs though is that once we have them installed, they're going to be completely maintenance free. We're not going to have to worry about air lines or monitoring air pressure like we do with airbags. So now that we have everything installed, we're going to take our motorhome back out on the test course and see how it handles. Now, as I'm driving over our bumps course, I can immediately feel a lot of difference. Don't get me wrong, there's still a little bit of roll, just naturally it's going to happen, but it's a lot more stable and it feels a lot more controlled, and the rebound isn't having the motorhome go up as high. And even on the solid speed bumps, it just feels like it's genuinely handling a little bit better and handling the bumps better. And as I continue down to our slalom course, going in and out of the turns, it definitely feels a lot more stable. There's not as much body roll, doesn't feel like a sports car, but it definitely is a lot more stable, and I have a lot more confidence driving through the course. To begin our installation, we want to lift up the rear end of our motorhome. You want to make sure you're lifting it by the frame, that it's supported so that the suspension can hang down. We'll go ahead and remove our tires so we can have room to work right in this area. Now we can start assembling our spring. So we'll grab the spring out of the box along with the upper bracket. Now on the top of the spring, we're going to have 4 holes that are pre-threaded. 2 of these are going to line up with 2 of the holes in the top of our bracket. So we want to make sure this little lip is facing up. Whenever we place it on top, we'll line up the holes. Then we're going to grab 2 of our 3/8 flange bolts. We'll get them started by hand, making sure they thread in. And come back with a 9/16 socket and tighten those up. Now we're going to take our assembly and we're going to flip it upside down. And we're going to have 1 threaded hole on the bottom. And we want to go ahead and grab our lower bracket. Now there's going to be a notch right here and a hook. The notch needs to go towards the front of our motorhome and the hook needs to go towards the back. So we'll lay it on top of our spring. Again, grab one of those 3/8 flange bolts. Get it started by hand and tighten it up with the 9/16. That way when we put it in place, we know that that notch is going to be towards the front because this is going to sit directly against the frame. So now we're going to take our entire spring assembly and that hook right here is going to land right on the inside of our front U-bolt. And then the notch in the front is going to go around our leaf springs. Now on our lower bracket, you'll notice that we're going to have a square hole that's going to be on the outside of our leaf springs as well as on the inside of the leaf spring. We're going to grab 2 of our carriage bolts. We're going to drop them down. And since the spring is already in there, it may take a little bit of wiggling around to get the bolt to drop down through. We'll make sure our spring's back in the position it's supposed to sit. And we're going to grab the lower clamp. And you'll notice it's going to be kind of a U shape. You want the flat section to go up against the bottom of the leaf spring, and we'll drop our bolts down through the 2 holes. And because of where our brake caliper is, you want to make sure that that notch right here is on the side by our brake caliper. And we're going to secure it down with 2 3/8 flange nuts. So for now, we'll just get them loosely started. That way we know the bracket won't fall down and the spring will help keep it in place. I'm going to come back with a 9/16 socket and I'm going to tighten up my 2 carriage bolts. Now when you're tightening those up, you want to alternate going back and forth so it has an even clamping force as it draws it up. Now the lower half in a secure position, it's not going anywhere. The top half can still move. Well, we're going to need to make a few marks. So we're going to come to this bottom hole on each side of our side plates. I'm going to make a mark going across right in the center of that hole going towards the outside. We'll use that as our reference point because we're going to need to measure on the frame here. And we can either measure from the top down 4.5 inches or measure from the bottom up 4.5 inches. So coming from the top of the frame, if we come to 4.5, I'll make a mark. We'll do that on both sides. And since our suspension is hanging because our vehicle is lifted by the frame, we're going to need to lift the axle up until the mark we made in our side plate reaches the mark that we made on the frame. Now I'm just going to be using a floor jack, putting it right underneath the hub and lifting up, but again you want to make sure that jack stands are in place and that your vehicle is safely lifted to begin with. So if you notice that one line is meeting up and the other line's above the other one, it's probably because we just need to kind of level out our spring to where it sits nice and even, and you just kind of have to play with the height adjustment until you get both lines to line up. Now I'm going to start out with a smaller drill bit than the final size, just so I can get through the frame and be a little bit easier to enlarge it. But before you start drilling, you always want to double check behind the frame and anywhere you're drilling so we don't drill into any lines or any electrical wires. And with our pilot hole drilled, I'm going to come back with that final 7/16 inch drill bit and enlarge that hole. You want to do that for both the lower holes. Now once both lower holes are drilled out, we're going to take our 3/8 flange bolts, we're going to pass it through the bracket, through the frame, and we'll go on the other side and we're going to secure it down with a 3/8 flange nut. I'm going to come back with a 9/16 socket and wrench, and I'm going to tighten up the hardware, making sure everything's secure. We can go ahead and drill out the middle hole on both sides. We'll repeat the same process with the same combination of hardware. So with the left side on, we can go ahead and repeat that same process on the passenger side, and we can put our tire back in place. That'll finish up your look at the SumoSprings Maxim custom helper springs for the rear axle on our 2017 Ford F53 Chassis Motorhome.